You know that moment when you're having fun with a game, but as you play, your smile and interest rapidly diminish? Well, sadly, River City Girls Zero, otherwise known as its original title, Shin Neketsu Koha Kunio Tachi no Banka, is exactly like that for me. Let me get this out of the way right now. The new additions that WayForward added in the game in the form of an excellent animated intro and a wonderful motion comic that set up the present universe reason for the game are fantastic. The issues rest solely with the original game, and a bit with the port itself. I should say I am all for this, as even with all I'm about to say, I'm so glad this game has been preserved like it has been, and translated all these years later officially. The story of the game is that Kunio and Riki are framed for a hit and run. After breaking out of jail, it's now up to them and their girlfriends to find out what all is going on, and also find the incredibly cheesy person behind it. For a Super Famicom beat 'em up, the story is good. Actually, for the time and genre, it's great, with fun, if not overly indulgent, story scenes that are constant throughout the game. It's a fast-paced gang biker youth story, and it has all the cliches you'd want, with a darker edge to it all. Character-wise, if you're coming straight off of River City Girls, don't expect a fun, cheeky cast here outside the intro. Everyone is more or less played entirely straight, save for a few fourth wall breaks I assume were added in the fresh translation, which I must note, regardless of how I feel about the game overall, it gets a 10 for the fact that it actually keeps the original literal translation as an option. Other companies take note, but yeah, the main characters are all rash, hot-headed punks who talk with their fists, but are deep down good despite their rough exterior. And the villains, well, it's stuff like the school bullies, biker gangs, and thugs, all of which you would expect. Now, gameplay. This is where I have every issue. It starts off fine, despite enemies being incredibly spongy, but the longer you play, the more you'll realize the controls just do not feel good and are too stiff, and often just don't work well at all. Starting with just Kunio and Riki, you eventually add Misako and Kyoko to your party, and all four essentially act as lies. However, if one dies and you don't switch to another, it's game over. Thank God for the small blessings, that is, if it continues, and the fact that your health recharges between areas, and if you die. The controls were abysmal. Seriously, blocking was timed, meaning you had to press and hold the button, but after a few moments, you'd drop your block. You need to hold the block button to use special attacks, but nothing worked how it should. There are no save states or rewinds if you're wondering, not that I'd use them, but it is good to know for people who do like those things. The controls are also pretty bad in general, often putting in inputs you weren't. For example, if I was kicking straight forward, but it would kick down and try to do a stomp move for some reason, or not even reading what you're trying to do at all, because there are some times that I'd be blocking and it would never register. You'll usually only fight 2 enemies at a time, which, while boring in its execution, is a blessing since even fighting one can be a chore to do. Combat isn't fluid. It's a grueling slugfest that takes forever, and the game just feels so incredibly slow because of it. Bosses are a whole other story, and they are just straight up abysmal. There were several bosses that I want to quit at, before finally, after reaching Mizuzu, I straight up did. Fighting them is a cruel joke of horrid hitboxes, unfair and cheap attacks, and tiring combat that feels even worse due to the fact that there is no enemy health bar allowing you to breathe a sigh of relief knowing you're doing okay in battle, or at least how you're doing at all. There are also 2 other additions that try to spice up the gameplay a bit, but just make it worse. First being rare but awful platforming, and the second being the neat in theory but terrible in execution motorcycle sections that were just bad. If you went too fast, you crash, and if you crash, it's an instant game over. Sure, when you start up this mode, it's cool, it's kind of like Road Rash, and you have fun beating up bad guys on your bike, but it really is just frustrating, because you have to speed up and then slow down, and rounding corners, it was just miserable, and I wish it wasn't an addition. Also, something that makes the gameplay far slower and tougher is that there are no health pickups, power-ups, or weapons of any kind. You know, those things you usually find in a beat-em-up title, they're not here. It's just you, your fists, and your janky, hard to pull off and not in a skill-based way moves. Visually, the game has plenty of charm and style, with detailed environments, unique sprites, and lots of variety. I really don't have that many complaints here, if any at all, save for the occasional screen tearing that went on. Everything looked good, and had that Super Famicom charm to it, and the opening animation and the motion comic are really fantastic. And again, they make me just wish that they made River City Girls Zero as a short OVA and included the game along with that instead. However, along with the noted occasional screen tearing, the game also soft-locked itself, and I couldn't move forward past this point, prompting me to restart the game, which was incredibly frustrating. Audio-wise, the fresh intro song done up by Megan McDuffie is absolutely great. It's a bit too silly, but it's still really fun, and sounds just as good as anything we heard in River City Girls itself. And the voice acting for the motion comic is really great fun. The main soundtrack for the actual game itself is fine, even good at points, but it's fairly repetitive, and the audio cracking in it and overused sound effects are just bad. With all that said, sadly I can't really recommend River City Girls Zero to casual fans, or really most people outside the most hardcore of retro gamers who love often unfair, frustrating, and cheap games. There's definitely a novelty here to this game, and I'm glad that it's been preserved, but for anyone wanting smooth, addicting, and well-made beat-em-up gameplay, just go check out out River City Girls itself, as outside of a few problems, that's definitely a good time.